excited to be here today. And I don't know about y'all, but that dance break gave me new life. I have been sitting in this chair pretty much all day, and that was lovely. So thank you, Rosie. I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get myself situated real quick. All right, everybody see that? Yes. Yes. Okay. Let me get my chat up so I can see that. All right. There we go. So, we all know that DEI and the coaching industry is a huge, huge topic. And there's absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to cover it in depth in 45 minutes. So, I figured that today I would stay in my lane and I would talk about celebrating gender diversity. We're also having a panel tomorrow on DEI and the coaching industry that I know will also focus a bit more on racial diversity and equity and inclusion. So I very much encourage you to pop in over there as well. All right, that's me. Susan just introduced me really well, but here is a little bit more about where you can find me and what I'm up to. So, I am a gender and sex therapist, coach, and speaker. And I also educate businesses and mental and physical health professionals on transgender and non binary inclusion. You can find me on all the social medias at Practical Audacity and genderfuck with no you because we're polite .club. I also always like to start out with a little bit about my social location so you can just see a little bit about where I'm coming from and who I am. Can everybody see the screen? We good? Okay. All right, great. So I use they, them pronouns. I identify as queer and non binary. Clearly, I am very, very white. And I'm assumed to be able bodied, even though that's not actually true. I have a chronic illness and disability that is invisible. So I bring that experience as well. And the fact that I'm white, it colors my lens, right? I do as much as I can to do my own learning and understand my own gaps, but I probably still have gaps. I know I still have gaps. So if I miss something, if I need an upgrade, please feel free to reach out. I really welcome that. So thank you for that. Um, Also, a little bit about my background, which is quite a doozy. So, I'm the adopted child of evangelical Christian missionary puppeteers from the Deep South. So, as you can imagine, the road to where I started to where I am now has been quite long and winding. I've had to move through a lot of my own biases related to my upbringing and the messages that society gave me about what I could and couldn't be and what I could and couldn't do. And I've had to get really comfortable making others, especially my family, uncomfortable in the name of my own self growth. And I know that we are all in the business of doing that and helping our clients do that. And I know how hard it is. I also know how rewarding it can be. And for those of you who are wondering about how it went when I came out to my family, here's an actual depiction of my descent into hell. And as you can see, I'm not mad about it. Doing great over here. So, why is this topic important? We're making a ton of strides towards trans inclusion. I know when Biden was elected, the queer and trans community collectively let out a breath. He mentioned trans people in his inauguration speech and said something on the Trans Day of Visibility. And I think it's the first time that a president has done either one of those things. We also know that we have a really, really long way to go. Even while there is more cultural conversation around trans inclusion and diversity and more media representation. So, just to illustrate a little bit of why we aren't there yet. So, this was within the past 4 years where they literally removed the term transgender from policies and laws and said that transgender people do not exist. We know that in 2020, the murders of transgender people surpassed 2019 in just 7 months. And I will also say, so I've been doing diversity and equity training and trainings on trans competency since 2015, 2016. And every year I update this slide to say that the previous year was the highest year on record for murders of transgender people. So we have come a long way, and we still have a very, very long way to go. Also, as a lot of you are probably aware, 2021 is a record year for anti trans legislation that is trying to get passed on all fronts. We also know that there is a really high incidence of suicidal thoughts and suicide in this population. So 98% of the respondents of this survey who had experienced 4 instances of discrimination and violence in the past year, which for a lot of trans folks, 4 instances of discrimination happens in a week. They 98% of them thought about suicide that year, and of that 98%, 51% of them attempted suicide. So we know that there is a huge, huge need. Trans folks are struggling. They are also hungry to create better lives for themselves. And as we all know, coaching is an amazing way to help folks break out of those boxes that they've been put in and provide a guide and accountability for making life-changing moves in their lives. However, they don't often see themselves in the coaching industry or in how coaching is advertised and assume it's not for them. In general, and I'm kind of around in the coaching community, I'm a part of several online communities, masterminds, memberships, things like that. So I see a lot of chatter. I know a ton of coaches. And some general things that I see is that it's very gendered. So a lot of coaches are either coaches for women or they're coaches for men. For women, as a piece of marketing copy and positionality, is a really super common thing that I see all the time. We also know that it is very cisgender. If you don't know that term, that just means that you identify with the sex that you were assigned at birth, and hetero-centered. So we still hear a lot of conversation about husbands and wives and assumptions about people being cisgender or people being heterosexually identified. It's also not exclusive or not explicitly trans inclusive. And I'll tell you this about the trans community. So we are very used to being excluded from spaces. We're very used to being discriminated against. And so the assumption is not that if you don't mention trans people or it's not explicit that you serve them, the assumption is that you don't. The assumption is that you are not a trans affirming coach because that's where a lot of us are starting from. People in the trans community are not used to being explicitly included. They're used to having to adapt and just kind of make it work in whatever spaces that they're in. So what does all of this mean? It means that we have to work a little bit harder. It means that we have to recognize that trans folks and non-binary folks are not automatically going to feel safe in your spaces. And you might have to do a little bit of extra work to make sure that you are making it clear that you are a trans affirming coach. All right. How many of you have seen the gender unicorn? Throw it in the chat if you have. Some of you maybe. Yeah, love it. Yes. Oh, yay, for me. Hooray. Cool. Some people have taught it. Awesome, Michelle. So usually when I'm doing these types of presentations, I will do a long spiel about language, a long spiel about gender identity and what that is. I'm going to give you, because of time, the real quick and dirty guide, okay? This is just to get us on the same page, at least somewhat, about what in the world I'm talking about in the first place. So I would love all of us to focus on these top three categories and to view them as completely separate sliders that all slide independently of each other. So I'm going to start here at sex assigned at birth. So what that means is you pop out of the womb and the doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl. At least that's what most of us think. However, what we know now from science is the number of people who are assigned intersex at birth, that is, they have physical sex characteristics, they have chromosomes, and or they have an endocrine system or the hormones that does not squarely fit into this binary box of male and female, is twice the population of Canada. So let's sit with that for just a second. We have created a binary system of gender based on an assumption of a binary sex assigned at birth system, which is not scientifically supported. If we left out Canada, if we left out two Canadas, when we're talking about North America, even, that would feel strange to us. But yet we leave out a huge diversity of biology when we reduce sex and gender down to just two binary categories. All right, I'm going to move up the ladder to gender expression. So, gender expression is the deep felt sense of who you are in relation to your gender. So, maybe that matches up to the sex that you were assigned at birth. So, if you pop out of the womb, the doctor says it's a girl, and you grew up and said, yep, I am a girl, I am a woman, then you are cisgender. Cis, Latin term, means on the same side as. If you pop out of the womb, the doctor says, it's a girl. You grow up and you say, nope, that doesn't feel like it fits. I identify as a man. You are a transgender man. Trans, Latin term, means on the other side of. So you are assigned female at birth. You identify on the other side of that as a transgender man. Third option, you pop out of the womb. The doctor says, it's a girl. And then you grow up, and this is my experience, so I'll use my personal story here. You grow up and you say, well, woman doesn't really feel like it fits. But also, I don't identify as a man. I don't want to be a man. That's not my identity. I identify somewhere firmly in the middle, which means that I personally identify as non binary. Making sense to everybody? Throw me a yeah into the chat. Yes, maybe. Yes, yes, yes. Great. Okay. The third knob or slider that we're going to talk about is gender expression. So, gender expression is simply how you choose to express your gender to the world. So, that might match up with what society expects that to look like, or it might not. Whether or not you are cisgender or trans, your gender expression is uniquely yours. You get to decide how you want to show up in the world and how you want to express that gender. All right, that was a real quick and dirty guide. Any questions really quick before I move on? Very clear. Lucinda, that is a great question. I'm going to get into some more language things soon. And if I don't answer it, feel free to, I'm in the Facebook group for the conference, so you can pop questions in there as well and tag me. Okay, I'm going to move forward then. All right. Celebrating gender expansion and diversity helps everyone, not just trans people. And let me show you a few examples of how gender gets in the way and how gendering things can sometimes be a little bit silly. So, first of all, here are some women's earplugs. Just, for your tiny, dainty ears, make sure you do not get the wrong gender of earplugs. Here's a bronut, donuts for men. Here's men's tea and women's tea. Just in case you weren't aware, make sure that you get the correct tea for your gender at the grocery store. We have no idea what will happen if you don't. Here's also Scrub Mommy and Scrub Daddy, which is the most sexual cleaning tool that I have ever heard of. Here's also some man size Kleenex for, the giant boogers that men have. And also some really dainty pink pins for your tiny feminine hands. Ridiculous, right? All right. We also gender some not so silly things. We gender bodies and we assign value/level of obscenity to them based on gendering and sexualizing the exact same tissue. If you look at these two bodies, the tissue is not much different. There's not much different in appearance, but one is obscene and the other isn't. We also used to gender little things like voting, for example. We used to gender the right to own property, the right to not be property, who can be a doctor or work in science, bank accounts. Yeah, somebody threw that into the chat. Um, it and fashion. So it used to be illegal to walk around in drag. People would be arrested if they wore pieces of clothing that were not appropriate to their gender. And this was a really big way that cities and cultures, well, I should say in the US, they used to crack down and discriminate against LGBTQ individuals. If we still had those laws on the books, we would be missing this really beautiful tux dress. And I don't want that for any of us. We all love Billy. Yes. Expanding and celebrating our definitions of gender, what is possible, how we express our gender to the world, has historically created a better and more free world for everyone, but especially for marginalized folks. It's really easy to point to all the ways that expanding our ideas about gender has helped women. It's also pretty easy to point to the ways that it's helped trans and non-binary folks. Basic things like, I don't know, human rights, protections. We're still working on that one. And it has created room for trans people to really thrive. The right to not have your identity declared a mental illness, the right to not be discriminated against in your employment or your housing because of your identity, and more representation in media, which we see with people like Laverne Cox, with the show Pose, with Janet Mock, Jonathan Van Ness, Elliot Page. We're seeing more and more people who have cultural permission, if you will, to come out and be themselves and be boldly and loudly themselves. However, gender expansion has also helped cisgender men. We know that men and boys are often punished for being too emotional and told to man up. More gender freedom means that men will be taught more emotional intelligence, more skills around communication and collaboration, and be less threatened by things that are deemed not manly enough. And generally, they will experience less shame. That will likely save lives because we know that as people get more emotionally intelligent and less shameful, they are less likely to perpetuate violence, have less school shooters, will have less violence against women, less police brutality, less hate crimes. And permission to be and do things that aren't traditionally considered masculine, which just creates more freedom for everybody. All of us suffer, no matter what your identity, when we are put into gender boxes. So, how do we create more equity and inclusion for trans folks in coaching? There's a ton that I could talk about here, but I wanted to give you some simple tips, some quick wins. Language is a really great place to start with that. So, language profoundly impacts the way that we see the world. The words that we use to describe ourselves and talk about ourselves, and the words others use to talk about us, it impacts how we see ourselves, our self-esteem, and even our sense of humanity. It's also a flag for trans and non binary folks to know that you are safe. If you get the language piece right in how you talk, in your marketing, on your website, in your groups, that will get you so far and be the number one thing that trans and non binary folks are looking for when they come to look at you as a potential coach. And the single most affirming thing that you can do in language is to use correct names and people's pronouns and to use more gender neutral language, which I will talk about all of those things. And we know that language is constantly evolving, and keeping up is essential to creating an affirming environment. It's also a challenge, especially in this community. The words that we use change so much, but it's worth doing the work to be able to talk to and about trans folks in the most affirming way. And I love this quote in this book. It's called The Remedy: Queer and Trans Voices in Healthcare. And it says, being able to effortlessly flow between pronouns, names, and identities in conversation, being able to weave these together in a way that fully honors and respects the person in front of you, however that looks for them, is a necessary skill. All right, so let's dig into some practical stuff. So, some general language principles. What I see a lot are folks that have very good intentions, who want to be trans affirming providers and coaches, but are so scared of messing up that they actually disconnect from trans folks. They back away. So, how can we step into the arena, to use Brene Brown language, and be okay with, as Erica Hines says, stumble and being ready to fumble? Because the truth is, you're all going to make mistakes. It's not an if, it's a when. And that's okay. That is part of the learning process. But here are a few tips to help you out. So, real names versus dead names. So, I want you all to imagine for a second that you walked around in your life and almost everybody that you came into contact with called you the wrong name. If I just started randomly calling Susan Katie, that would be weird because that's not Susan's name. In the same way, yeah, very strange. But that is the reality of what trans folks have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, because their legal name might not match up with their chosen name, the name that they want to be called. And so I threw up the term dead name because it's a dramatic term, but it really speaks to how important it is to use the name that someone chooses. So, creating opportunities for someone to share the name that they want to use in your programming is a really quick and easy way to let them know that you see them and affirm them for who they are. Being a pronoun pro, I'm going to get into some tips for how to use pronouns effectively. And this includes the use of the gender neutral pronoun they. If you can get people's names and pronouns right, you're about 80% of the way there. And that's really good news, because that is not always an easy thing, but a very simple thing to do. Just reading some chats. Okay. Yeah. So, quick story. I was in a coaching session the other day in my Genderfuck coaching group, and somebody who's a newer member changed their name on Zoom for the first time and changed their pronouns to she, her for the first time. And my rule of thumb in my coaching program is that your Zoom name is your name, and your name in the private member community is your name. You can change it as much as you want. Doesn't matter to me, but if you put it up there, that's what I'm going to call you. So I called this person by her new name, and she immediately teared up because that was the first time she had ever had an opportunity to try out a new name that actually felt affirming to her gender identity. That is a powerful thing. Using gender neutral language whenever possible. I'm going to give you some practical tips for that as well. And then moving on from mistakes, which I'll also give you some tips on that. All right. Here are some barriers that I see come up a lot for folks being a pronoun pro. First of all, is an internalized gender binary and reinforced gender norms. Our brain likes to create shortcuts. It's how we know that a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are both in the broad category of dog. That's a smart thing for our brains to do. It keeps us from having to think too much, and it just automatically creates some neural connections. What that does and how that doesn't serve us, though, here is that our brain, based on the culture that we live in, has made some connections and neural pathways about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, and what it means to express masculinity and femininity in the world. And our work is to unlearn those connections that our brain has made and intentionally choose the way that we think and talk about gender. Another reason that being a pronoun pro can be difficult is that we're not used to it. It's a new thing, especially using pronouns like they, them, or neo pronouns like ze or here. Those things take a little bit of practice just because we're not used to it yet. But that's okay. Gender neutral pronoun barriers. So when I say gender neutral pronouns, I'm primarily talking about they, which is the pronoun that I use. There are also other pronouns. People are creating language because language is dynamic. Other pronouns that feel like they fit for them. If you're curious about that, Google it. There's some list of a bunch of neo pronouns. It's a little bit less common. I'd probably focus just on that they, them pronoun. But the things I hear the most are that it's too hard and it's not grammatically correct. So the too hard, we're all adults here. Let's be real. It's not too hard. It's language. It's not that difficult. It might take a little bit to get used to, but I fully believe that each and every one of you here has the ability to learn to use they, them pronouns. You can do it. I believe in you. Also, this is the face that people give me, or they give people when they ask them to use they, them pronouns a lot. And again, I just want to assure you, you got this. You can do it. And for my grammar nerds out there, if you notice, this was in 2016, okay? Years ago, that they was declared the word of the year as a gender neutral pronoun. I forget which dictionary did this, but it was one of the big ones, Oxford, Merriam-Webster, something like that. But how? How do we ask about pronouns? What do we do? So here's a few little tips. First of all, as early as possible. So on your intake forms, which I'm assuming most of you have, you can add a spot for pronouns. In your first coaching session, that's a great time to introduce yourself, introduce your pronouns, and to ask somebody for theirs. The simplest way to do it is to start with you. So I, at the very beginning of my presentation, told you what my pronouns were. It's very easy to say, hi, my name is Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and then to ask somebody's name and what pronouns they use. If you realize that you've assumed someone's pronouns, which happens, right? Our brains have that quick neural pathway that we're unlearning. That's okay. You can just ask for clarification and own your mistake. Hey, I realized that I assumed that your pronouns were XYZ. I just wanted to check in. What pronouns do you use? Quick and easy way. I also recommend that you ask for everyone. Gender identity does not equal, gender expression does not equal gender identity. I've worked with a lot of people over the years that if you saw them walking down the street, you would not clock them as a trans person. They look like a cis person walking down the street. You cannot tell if somebody is trans or non binary simply based on how they look. And I also like to tell this story. I worked with a trans woman who was in her 60s who came to me to start coming out as trans. So, coming out in her 60s, she was high up in the sports world and she had been struggling with her gender since her 20s. So when her wife died and she got ready for retirement, she finally decided that it was time to come out as trans. You never know. There might be somebody in front of you who looks like the most brotastic bro that you have ever met, and you asking them the question about their gender identity, about their pronouns, that might be exactly the question that they need to hear. And it might be the only time that somebody has asked them that. And inevitably, when I bring this up, somebody says, well, what if someone is offended that I've asked their pronouns? I don't care. And that's a glib response, but it's also the truth. Discomfort is not harm. If someone is offended because you've asked them their pronouns, you have not harmed them in any way. However, what is harm is misgendering a trans person because you were afraid of offending someone. We're working to create more equity, more inclusion. And that means sometimes that the people with more privilege get to be uncomfortable because we are working to create more equity and inclusion. A really easy way that you can give a flag that you are affirming is by putting your pronouns into your email signature and your Zoom name. So while we're here, let's just take a second to all do that together. So if you click on those two little dots in your view, right, your screen, you can change your name on Zoom, I believe. Yeah. So everybody take a second, and if you're comfortable sharing your pronouns, please throw them in there. Thank you to thank you to the folks who are doing that. Awesome. That's a really, really quick and easy way for you to remind yourself on Zoom what the people in front of you's pronouns are, which in kind of the Zoomscape that we're in now, a lot of trans and non binary folks are on Zoom all the time. They're getting misgendered all the time on Zoom. Again, your space might be one of the only spaces where you are intentionally creating that inclusion for them. So, what do you do if you fuck up? Because you will, it is inevitable. We want to move on from mistakes. We don't want to dwell there, which means that we don't want to get into a shame spiral about how we're a terrible, awful, trash human because we made a mistake. You're not. I assure you, you made a mistake. It's fine. Correct yourself, apologize if necessary, do any repair if you need to, and then move on in that conversation and go do your own learning later to make sure it doesn't happen again. Yeah, there we go. All right, let's talk about gender neutral language. So, here are a few really quick and easy upgrades for you that make a huge difference. First of all, throw into the chat if you've noticed, let's say yes if you've noticed, no if you haven't, that I have not used a single gendered way to refer to any of you today and any of my greetings and any of our conversation. Yeah. Yeah. Some people noticed, some people didn't. Was anybody offended because I did not use gendered greetings? No, nobody was offended. A lot of people didn't even really notice. So here's the thing. If you gender your greetings and you gender just language that we're going to talk about, the trans people and the non binary people will notice and they will care. And it will If it doesn't offend them, it will be a mild irritation at best. At worst, it will cause them to dissociate. It will cause them to opt out, stop listening, has a big impact. The cis people generally don't care, and they're not really even going to notice most of the time. So it's a very simple way that you can add more inclusion into your work. Somebody asked, what about the French market? It's really hard. I am an English speaker, and I'm not the expert on languages that I just explicitly gender things. I know that there are a lot of people who are working to kind of figure that out, but there aren't any clear answers. I know in Spanish, some people have started adding X or an E to the end of Spanish words instead of using O or A, and that's one way that people have tried to disrupt language a bit to create more gender neutrality there. Okay, so here are some things that we typically gender that we don't need to. Pronouns. So there's nothing wrong with using he or she pronouns unless that's not somebody's pronoun. So if you don't know what somebody's pronoun is, the safest thing to do and the most inclusive thing is to use the gender neutral pronoun of they until you can confirm what their pronouns are. Greetings, we hear boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, and even guys, which I'm from the South, y'all, so I had to unlearn y'all, or I unlearned y'all. I shouldn't say I had to, and learn guys when I moved up north, and then had to unlearn guys to degender my own language and have reclaimed y'all. So some ways that you can greet people that are not gender exclusive are folks. I love that one. Friends, everybody, y'all, all, team, squad. There's a million different ways that you can do it. Family terms. We don't have family terms for every family member that are gender neutral, but we do have some. So instead of saying mom, dad, brother, sister, wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, we can be a little bit more neutral and say parent, sibling, partner, grandparent, sweetie. I like that one a lot. It's cute. Okay. This one might be a little bit challenging for folks. This is typically the one that I get a lot of questions about and I get some pushback on. But I'm going to challenge you here because this is something I think is really important. And I'm getting a 5-minute warning, so cool. Do you really only provide services to women? Or is your ideal customer someone who has been negatively impacted by the patriarchy? Or is it someone who has felt disempowered because of systemic oppression? How can you be more clear and intentional about who you serve without using women as simply an automatic placeholder? And do you really only provide services to mothers? Or do you provide services to any parents who have had a child, whether they birthed them or not, whether they identify as a woman or not? And energy. So I hear a lot of people, particularly coaches in the wellness space, who talk about feminine and masculine energy. And are we really talking about feminine and masculine energy? Or are we talking about societally imposed ideas that box in qualities that we've decided to construct as belonging to one particular gender, often to the detriment of that gender, since behavior that doesn't conform to this social standard is usually looked down upon? So the idea that masculine energy is aggressive and competitive, and women are nurturing and soft and intuitive. So try this instead and just ask yourself, what are you talking about? Are you talking about nurturing energy, powerful energy, yin or yang energy, soft, competitive, intuitive energy, slow or fast? And how can you be more intentional and precise about who you serve and how you talk about your services? Where are you using gendered placeholders instead of doing this work to really figure it out? And are there other ways besides gendering your services that you can communicate who you serve? So, whether that is marketing copy, if there are other buzzwords that you use, if it's how your site looks, if it's your vibe, there are a million ways that you can pull in the people that you want to serve without mindlessly gendering your services. All right. So that is my most challenging slide. I know we only have 5 minutes. So I want to leave you with this. Gender transition is not the point. Creating a world where gender exploration and transition is celebrated so that folks can walk around feeling good in their skin, lit up, and the most authentic version of themselves is. When folks walk around as their most authentic self, they go on and they do the amazing things in the world they are meant to do, say, create, and be. And you have a chance to be a part of that. And that is pretty damn magical, if I do say so myself. And again, this is all the places where you can find me. And if you want more trans affirming resources, then you can text Practical Audacity, it's not case dependent, to this number right here. It'll ask you for your email and it will automatically send you those resources. So I'll leave that up for a minute and I will hand over the floor to Susan.
Oh my gosh. This every time I hear this, and I've heard you teach this now 3 different times, I learn something new each and every time. Um, you're such a gifted instructor. We're so lucky to have you at the university. What an amazing talk. I sat here when you first started thinking, I wish every human had to watch this presentation. I wish it was a requirement